I used to work at a cheese factory at the edge of a cornfield in southwestern Minnesota. There were a series of days in the summer from 2004 or 2005 where it was so hot that the milk being delivered to us in trucks would evaporate before we even got it. It actually made work pretty easy. The dearth of milk denied us any actual labor, but management wouldn't let us not come to work. So we would just show up and mess around all shift long. I was working nights at the time. It was 2 or 3 a.m., I think, and I was out on the loading dock watching bats fly around the floodlights because I like being out in the cool night air. The corn was about as high as my shoulder, so about 5 foot 10 inches. As I was watching the bats, I looked down at the edge of the cornfield. Something was moving there. It was the size of a small child and very, very skinny. It was also pale, with something that looked like a head of straight black hair. It moved in a sort of jerky gait, like someone dancing the robot very badly. It moved in chunks, legs, then hips, then torso, shoulders, neck, and finally the head. It was looking back into the cornfield, or at least I felt like it was. I felt prickly all over. I didn't know what it was. I thought it was a blue heron or something like that at first, but it looked too much like a person. It didn't move like a person, though. Gradually, step by step, it began to move towards me. Letting my curiosity better my fear, I moved towards the edge of the dock, which was raised a few feet off the ground. When I got within a few feet of the edge, the thing began to look at me. I was paralyzed. I could have run, but I was stuck somewhere between terrified and intrigued. While it moved, its face still pointed at me. It ratcheted its body up in a disconcerting, jerky movement towards the cornfield and went into it. I tried to watch where the field moved as it passed, but the corn remained perfectly still. It was then that I noticed that all the crickets had stopped chirping. After a few minutes, nothing happened. I stood out there for another hour, but it never came back. I never saw that thing again, nor do I want to. So my strange story took place on the 26th of September, 2009. My church was on a retreat in Indiana, in a forest. The place we stayed at was a small building in the center of the forest. We decided that evening to go out and play in the forest with the children, so we came up with a game to play. It was like police, meaning that the kids were the police and we would pick an adult to be the hostage. So when we began the game, we had to first find the adult hiding in the forest in the middle of the night. So we started going around the back of the building and we spotted a tall figure. It had to be at least 6 feet tall. It was running towards the trees where there was a small open area with tall grass that goes up to your knees. It ran with its arms at its sides, but it stopped at the edge of the tall grass, as if to wait for us to get closer. We chased after it, thinking that it was the adult. When we were finally a few yards away, it dove into the grass and started to crawl very fast, almost snake-like. We all definitely got weirded out, but stood there staring at it nevertheless. When it got across the tall grass, it began to climb a tree. It looked somewhat like a deformed cat-like animal when it was climbing. Then a few moments later, a kid had yelled, "I see him!" and pointed in an opposite direction. We saw a similar figure running a couple of yards away, so we chased it, but then it vanished behind a tree. Turns out, a few minutes later, we found the adult hiding in the parking lot in front of the building the entire time. So who knows what we had saw that night in the forest. At least 15 kids saw that thing with me, so I know I'm not crazy. I was driving on Broadkill Road in Broadkill Beach, Delaware, around dusk in July of 2007. This road borders a very swampy area. Standing on the side of the road by the swamp, my daughter and I saw a creature the likes of which we've never seen before. It stood about 2.5 to 3 feet tall with long legs, a tan body, a flat, almost puggish face, and a very long tail. It had small ears and looked to be about 30 pounds. My older daughter and her friend also saw this same animal the year before, around the same area, except it was night, and it ran out in front of their car. I asked the lady who owned the Broadkill Beach store about it, and she said that she had seen it once before when she was dirt biking with her father in the area years ago. And yet her and her father had no idea what the thing was, even though they were both raised in Broadkill. She said that we were very lucky to have spotted it, as very few people have even seen it. We went to the Prime Hook Reserve, this is what the swampy area is called, museum, and they had no idea what the thing even could be. I was wondering if anyone else had seen it and knows what the hell this thing is. This story takes place, I think, in the summer of 1995, making me around 9 years old. Practically every other year, my family would take a trip to Florida. We would usually go to Disney World, but my mother was getting sick of that this year, so that year we actually didn't go to Disney World, and instead to my sister's house in Disney. On one of these days, we were on a beach. I don't remember what the beach was called, but the people sitting next to us mentioned it being the bottom tip of Florida. After a while of nothing happening, everybody was either in the ocean or sunbathing silently. A woman sitting to the left of us pointed past us to our right, asking, "What is that?" We all turned and looked to a surprisingly vacant corner of the beach. There were no people down there, but what was there was something very strange. We all got up to get a better look, very quickly forming a crowd around it. If I had to describe the creature we saw in one word, that word would be cartoonish. I will never forget what it looked like. It was green and looked like a ball of slime around the size of a basketball. It had tentacles resting on the ground around it, with two longer tail-like tentacles sticking out of its back. The thing that was most bizarre and made it look cartoonish were its eyes, which were on stalks that stood about a foot off of its body. The eyes looked creepily human and just looked at us in an almost disinterested way. The other strange thing about it was its mouth, which never seemed to close, and where you would expect teeth were instead tooth-shaped, fleshy protrusions. No one, not even the creature, seemed scared, and after a while it lazily slithered back into the ocean. There were roughly 10 witnesses to this thing, and we all spent most of our time talking about what it must have been. One idea was that it was a parasitic organism for a much larger creature, one that was possibly never even identified. You will never believe what I saw one very cold, dry November night. My family and I moved into a new house upon a hill on a little back road in a very small town of Fort Gay, West Virginia. Fort Gay sits right on the east side of Kentucky. The population of my town then was probably just a couple thousand. So my family and I were unpacking. We had not yet put the furniture in their rightful places yet, and everything was still in boxes. Overwhelmed with working all day, I retired around 11 p.m. I put my little brother on the couch and took his bed, since my bed wasn't really put together yet. His room faces the front of the house. His window was around 20 to 25 feet or so off the ground. So I was looking out the window when I saw it. It stood about 7 feet tall. I had no idea what it was, but I was frozen in fear. I had never been that scared in my entire life. All I could do was just lay there and stare at this thing. It was sitting in a tree about 50 or so feet off the ground, right by our neighbor's house, which was about 50 yards from ours. It felt like an eternity. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even blink. It had big, red, bright glowing eyes looking dead into my face. I finally worked up enough courage to close my eyes and put my head under the covers, when all of a sudden this thing smacked into the window. I went through the house screaming, "There's something outside! There's something outside!" I was inconsolable in tears. My mom and dad looked at me and said, "What the hell's wrong with you? It looks like you've just seen a ghost." My face was snow white. I said, "I don't know what it was. Just please, Daddy, don't go outside." I begged and I begged. He came back in and said that there was nothing out there. I kept screaming, saying, "Yes, there is! Yes, there is!" When I explained to them what I had saw and how I felt, they said I was crazy. But to this day, I will not go outside by myself. And even in the day, someone still has to watch me to my car. I've heard of some pretty crazy things going on up that road, but I never expected to experience anything myself. My husband and I went to the theaters and watched Mothman Prophecies. I was reliving that night all over again. The way they described feeling and what they saw was remarkable. My husband looked over at me and said, "Isn't that what you described to me when we first started dating?" I couldn't say a word. After that moment, I knew what I saw. I believe in my heart of hearts I saw the Mothman. It's just a little weird. I only live about 80 miles south of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where all that took place 37 years ago. It was exactly 32 years ago to this month where I saw it. Hey guys, it's Gotea here. Thank you so much for listening to this video. I love cryptid creature stories and I know you love them as well, so I will keep pumping them out weekly. Or bi-weekly, I guess we'll see. But if any of you have any stories of your own that you would like for me to tell and share, please send them to me via my personal email linked in the description below, and I'll be sure to include them in one of my future videos. So, with all that being said, thank you again so much for listening, and I will see you mates in the next episode.